about my past, or I don't live in the past, and I certainly don't have a victim kind of mentality where I want to whine and tell you all about what happened to me, but rather it's my love for humanity and my concern for the future of our planet that compels me to speak out and tell you my experience and mind control so that it can give you a better understanding of exactly how it works, why it works, and how it's being used against us all to varying degrees. When I was just a young child growing up in Muskegon, Michigan, this was back in the late 50s, early 60s, mind control was already in full swing. Operation Paperclip had brought the Nazi and fascist scientists into the United States. Dr. Ewan Cameron was having his experiments at the Allen Memorial Institute, and the information on mind control was escalating beyond what had even happened in Nazi Germany at that time when I was just growing up. I was born into a multi-generational incest-based family. My mother had been sexually abused, my father had been sexually abused, and therefore they were sexually abusing me. The Hitler-Himmler research had already determined that the multi-generational incest-based families, or any kind of abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse, as was my case, would create an autogenic response after 3 generations of abuse. When a parent would abuse a child, who would abuse their child, who would abuse their child, pretty soon it became an autogenic action where it wasn't even perceived as anything other than normal. And abuse was creating this dissociative identity disorder. When a person suffers from dissociative identity disorder, they're easily led and manipulated. When they're easily led and manipulated, they can be mind controlled more easily, as was what the Hitler-Himmler research had found out. The kind of mind control that went on in Nazi Germany was significant enough to manipulate the minds of the whole population, gain control of the children's mind, the Hitler's youth of that time, and also to create a kind of propaganda hold over the whole population. These studies had advanced tremendously by the time I was growing up. Even though the sexual abuse seemed so normal in my family because due to the multi-generational aspect that had been going on for so many generations, it still wasn't a natural thing. So I developed this dissociative identity disorder, which is defined professionally as the mind's sane defense to trauma too horrible to comprehend. There's no way a child can comprehend sexual abuse. They don't understand sex. They don't understand abuse. A child doesn't understand why a parent would be causing them physical harm. And even though that at that age, due to the multi-generational aspect, as far back as I can remember, there was a heightened sexuality, it didn't preclude the fact that I endured the pain and the suffocation of my father's sexual abuse, particularly while I was still an infant. This pain and trauma from my own family, who I should be able to turn to for help, was creating a compartmentalization of memory, where when my father would sexually abuse me, the part of my brain that had dealt with his abuse would actually open up to deal with it again. It was familiar with it. It knew how to deal with it. It knew how to handle it. When I would go to school and as a very young child, I didn't think of my father's sexual abuse because that had been compartmentalized into a small part of my brain so that the rest of my mind could function normally as though nothing had happened. Again, this is the mind's sane defense against the trauma that was too horrible to comprehend. I had no no comprehension for it. So in school, I wouldn't think of that. I wouldn't think to bring that to mind. When abuse continued in other directions as well, such as the child pornography that my father was using me in, then I developed compartments in my brain to deal with the pornography that I was being subjected to. He was also sharing me sexually with relatives. I mean, after all, that was a, quote, normal thing among family members. And he was also prostituting me to certain friends of his. This was his way of supplementing the family income. My father had a 6th grade education and was earning his living as a worm digger. And so he was supplementing the family income with the proceeds from the child pornography and the prostitution. This created more compartments in my brain. There was a certain faction at that time of the U.S. government that was very much interested in targeting children like myself to raise in MKULTRA mind control. Since it had been determined that the abuse would create this high suggestibility, which was primed for mind control, when Operation Paperclip had occurred in the United States, this information was taken from the Nazi and fascist scientists, combined with information that the CIA had gleaned, and also the information that had been learned by the Catholics regarding trauma, the effects of trauma on the human mind through such things as the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition. They had already learned what would happen there. All this information was being compiled and put together in a very strong form of mind control, the MKULTRA mind control. So a local politician approached my father at that time and told him that he could receive immunity from prosecution for making and selling this child pornography of me if he would agree to sell me into MKULTRA mind control. My father thought it was a wonderful idea. Not only did he feel like that was a nice way out of any legal ramifications for his actions, but he also felt like the government condoned child abuse. After all, they were sanctioning it. After all, they were giving him immunity from prosecution. So he eagerly sold me into the project. And as quickly as he did, he was given instructions to go to Boston, Massachusetts, where he was given more instruction on how to raise me in the project, how to manipulate a highly suggestible young mind. He was just conditioning me for the kind of robotic mind control that I would experience later. This place where he was taken in Boston, Massachusetts also is the very same one that we've heard about in recent times regarding the Catholic child abuse. And I believe in the United States anyway, it was termed homosexuality as an emotional diversion away from the reality that was actually abuse of children for a very deliberate purpose of mind control. Now, I'm certainly not saying all Catholics are bad. I mean, that's absurd. There's no classification of or label for the people that are involved in this. It's just a handful of criminals that weave in and out of our society who are affecting a great many people with what they know and what we all should know about mind control. This criminal faction within the Catholic Church was very predominant in Muskegon, Michigan, where I was growing up. There was a huge church there that had a lot of the CIA connections for mind control purposes deliberately. There were occult rituals there that I was subjected to from that time on, which gave me more compartments within my brain. It also was, I endured abuse by priests, which was very devastating as well. Because as a very young child, that seemed so sacred, and now where was I going to turn? I couldn't turn to my parents for protection. I turn to people in my community, and now I couldn't even turn to my local